Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited about this program. It's kind of been a while in the making, and Allah is the best of planners, and we just submit to His will and go according to His timeline, alhamdulillah. I feel very blessed with the panel of speakers that we have today. Just in the time that I've spoken to them prior to the program, I've already learned so much. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know them and learning more about their experiences. And I'm sure all of you are going to find this very beneficial, inshallah. Regardless of what the flyer said, this is actually a 2-hour program, not a 3-hour program. We hope that the last half an hour of it will be for question and answer. We do want people to get an opportunity to ask those questions and to get their questions answered and stimulate some discussion, inshallah. We hope that this will be a launch pad for people to start their individual learning about racism and how to become an anti-racist, inshallah, how to make our communities, our masajid, our homes, our Islamic schools, our hearts more inclusive, more welcoming, and actively anti-racist as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam guided us and modeled for us and taught us through his sunnah and through his words, through his actions, and through the way that he lived his life. So inshallah, that is our goal. As all of you know, this is a huge topic. We can't do it justice in one session. We will inshallah send out after this to the email that you used in your registration, a list of resources so that people can further this learning process on their own. This is like all true learning is a lifelong process, inshallah, of educating ourselves and of changing our behaviors and of being vulnerable in our learning, knowing that we won't be perfect in this process. We may make mistakes, but we're all learning and trying, and we're here to support one another, inshallah. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Yenz. I am one of the co-founders of Carriers of Light School, along with our principal, Ms. Aman, and my sister, Mahreen Baula. All the three of us started the school about just over 10 years ago. And our goal has always been to try to think outside the box and look at what's already out there and see what we can do differently and what we can try to do better, and constantly trying to improve, inshallah. So this is one of the areas where we hope as a school that we can learn from this and we can benefit and make true changes, actual, lasting, impactful changes in the way that we vision our school and our mission and vision, in the way that we write our curriculum and what curriculum choices we make, in the way that we educate our teachers, our students, our parents, our families, and our community, as well as us as individuals, inshallah. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ms. Saima Ahmed. She is one of our teachers at Carriers of Light. She's a kindergarten teacher. She's entering her 7th year with us, mashallah, and she has always done an outstanding job in trying to educate her students about topics related to racism and being inclusive of the Black community, and really done, I think, a very good job, and she's always trying to learn and do more. And she's going to be moderating this panel and introducing you to our guest speakers, who we're very honored to have here today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Ms. Saima take over.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. I share Ren's sentiments. I'm really excited to be here as a part of this program and to be able to introduce to all of you 2 amazing women from our community. First, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Donna C. Demir. Donna Demir is the Help Advisor and co-founder of Zakat Foundation of America. She has navigated extreme degrees of racism as a Black child growing up and as an immigrant living in Switzerland while working as an RN, excuse me, in the white American workforce, as an assumed immigrant, and while being part of an immigrant Muslim community. In her spare time, Donna loves to write poetry, addressing issues related to several topics, such as the rights of women, poverty, oppression, slavery, and love of God. She considers herself not a survivor, but a thriver. Donna, thank you so much for being with us today. Very excited to hear from you today. And we are also honored and really blessed to have with us Dr. Aisha El-Amin. Dr. Aisha holds a PhD in Policy Studies in Urban Education from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She has a Master's of Education from DePaul University and a Bachelor of Science and Management Studies from the University of Maryland and the European Division. Dr. El-Amin is passionate about issues in equity and justice in education, and these passions have led her to become an Illinois State Board of Education certified K through 9th grade teacher. She has been an adjunct professor at several colleges and universities, and she's been elected.
أنا هلا حفوت على قالتي أنت بتسمي هون تم شاغل.
I'm sorry, you all could please make sure that your microphones are muted. We would really appreciate that. Thank you. Dr. Amin has also served several roles at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and she is currently the Associate Provost and Chief of Staff for the Provost. She has earned numerous recognitions, and she's held many leadership roles in Chicago-based organizations. Thank you so much, Dr. Aisha, for being with us today. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to jump right into it because we have a lot to cover. We're going to start off the program by discussing a little bit of history, the history of anti-Black racism in America. Now, there's a lot of history of anti-Black racism in America. It's a lot to cover, but Sister Donna is going to do her best to give us the most important pieces of this history, because a lot of us, although even the ones that have been born and raised here, we've kind of been denied this information throughout the academic curriculum that we've been taught. And also a lot of the audience that we have here with us today is the immigrant population who may not have even learned any of this history. So it's really important to start at the beginning before we move on to understand how we got to where we are now. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass the mic to Donna. She's gonna start us off with some history.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Saima and Rand. I want to thank you guys so much for having us and providing this platform, I'd like to say. Yeah, I think this, just as you stated, this is something that's very pertinent to know for all of us, because we're all living in this country, and we have gotten a lot of false narratives, or as you stated, narratives that have been purposely negated. So let me just start off by I'm going to start off with this, and I might end up repeating this a few times more because a lot of people just aren't aware. I'm giving you a definition of institutionalized racism, and I have a ton of notes, so excuse me, I'm going to be reading off of those. Institutionalized racism, also known as systemic racism, is defined as a form of racism which is embedded as a normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, amongst many other issues. So that's kind of what we're ultimately here to talk about today, and how, as you stated, we can improve our own lives as best we can. So what I've done here is I have a timeline for you guys to kind of get an overall view of the last 400 years. And this is something that we've been dealing with. Yeah, if you can probably show that timeline, Saima, while I talk. That kind of gives us a visual of kind of where we are. So as you see at the beginning of the timeline, 1526, even though a lot of literature might say it was a little bit later, but we find that the first Africans were brought to the shore of North America. And many other places along the way. So we've got 1526 there, and then you see all of that red period, which is the actual enslavement, what we're looking at there. If we move a little bit further down the line, when we get to the 1865, 1863, right around there, that's the Reconstruction period. And I am going to go back and explain a few of these things. So 1865 to 1877 was actually the Reconstruction period. Then we on a little bit further, and then we see the mid 1950s, which was the start of what we know as our modern civil rights movement of today. But Black Americans have been trying to obtain equal rights and civil rights from way before 1954. So I just wanted you guys to kind of get that timeline. When we talk about 400 years, and I will touch upon what that actually means to a lot of us Black Americans, but that's the timeline there, 1526 up until present day. And that's a long time, you know. So to backtrack a little bit, like I said, 1526, we're talking about the arrival of the first Africans that came, that left the continent of Africa and made their way through the Middle Passage, several stops along the way. There's some estimates that there were 12.5 million Africans that were taken from Africa itself, and they say that 388,000 ended up here in North America. Now, when we talk about that, it's a little more detailed. That was called the Middle Passage, or the Atlantic slave trade, from the 1500s to the 1800s. Again, 12.5 million people loaded on boats, 388,000 to North America. And they couldn't really come up with an exact number, but they think it was close to 2 million people that died before they made it to the. A lot of you have seen pictures of how the slaves were transported here, stacked on boats, you know, stacked and packed like sardines in a can, and 50% died before arrival, they think. It was absolutely horrific. This was the beginning of what is actually known as economic capitalism, because Africans were bought here really as cargo and to work and build the country. So that's pretty much how we got here, for the most part. Slavery, they've often called this form of slavery chattel slavery. We know the history of slavery. It's global, it's around the world. We know all the stuff. Islamically, it's haram, but it happens. But they've stated time and time again, the form of slavery here in the US was probably one of the worst forms of slavery, where families were not allowed to stay together. They were not allowed to marry. Everyone was sold off, just like horses, sheep, cattle. Anyone could be put up on a chopping block, totally nude, undressed. They would have their gums looked at, their private parts looked at, to figure out if they would be a good candidate to reproduce, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was really bad, and it was really graphic. Everything that happened in those absolutely horrible years. When we go back and we think about this period of time, it just went on for so very long. Again, if you look at that from the 1500s up until the Emancipation Proclamation of 1865, so it was quite a long time. And a lot of the brutalities that were involved in that, there was, again, forced procreation, rape, children being sold, taken away from their mothers, not to marry, having Christianity forced upon them to a certain degree. A lot of the slaves were from West African countries, East Africa as well. They would often put people together from different tribes so they purposefully could not communicate with each other. So a whole culture was lost, a language was lost, dignity, humanity was lost. In fact, story has it that a lot of the slaves, when they realized that they were going someplace else, I mean, imagine how long it took to get from the west coast of Africa, from Senegal or from Ghana, all the way to the United States. Imagine back then how long it took. And a lot of them, if they were allowed to be free for any short period of a time, they threw themselves overboard, and they threw their children overboard. So, you know, you guys can read up on that a little bit yourself if you'd like to. I have some information here. I think if I fast forward a little bit and we start talking about the 1860s, that I think is really, really very pertinent, because we all need to know this. We're living in America now. We need to know some things about the Constitution.
I'm loving your timeline. I think it's also, I want to add that there were African-American Muslim slaves, and that's very well documented right now, that they brought over the Quran by memory. They made their prayers. There's several documents now that show us that we were brought over here with our dean, and we fought even during the time of, you know, the heat and picking. We would still fast for the month of Ramadan, right? And so Omar Ibn Said there's a autobiography of his life as a Muslim slave. So there was some very rich histories that happened, and very and it says inside of that context, even in turmoil and strife and struggle, we still persevere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of that too. And you guys that are well, those of us that are listening that are here from Chicago, you know how down at Navy Pier they do the tall ships exposition every year, every few years. They have some of those ships, as you're saying, Sister Aisha, where there is Arabic carving, you know, Quranic carving in the actual walls of these ships. So, you know, we really need to know these things so that everything is not always so consistently disjointed, I think. When we talk about the US Constitution, there's a couple of amendments that are very, very pertinent. And a lot of us have missed it in school, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Aside from those amendments, Constitution actually, and you can help me out with this, Sister Aisha, actually stated that Black people were not a whole person. I can't remember right now the percentage, but Black people were not considered to be a whole person. Like, I think it was 3/5 or something like that of a human being. So, you know, these things are very, very important to know, because all of this it's in our DNA, it's in our cultural DNA, it's in our everyday societal habits. And hence, that's why it's systemic, institutionalized racism that comes to that. The 13th Amendment from 1865 abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except when applied as a punishment. Now, that's something that's very significant. I think Sister Aisha is going to talk about this a little bit later too. You can catch a documentary on Netflix called 13. Basically, break it down in plain English is, if you've gone to prison, if you're in prison, whether you committed a crime or not, which is another story, but if you're in prison, you can actually be used for labor because you are in prison. Also, you lose the right to vote if you ever do get out of prison. That's another issue. 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship and protection and supposedly equality to all born or naturalized citizens in the country. And one of these three amendments was passed during the Reconstruction period, which I will speak of, which was 1863 to 1877. The 15th Amendment, 1869, was ratified in 1870, granted the right to vote to Blacks, okay? Which again will lead us up to the modern civil rights movement. All of these amendments, everybody needs to be aware of. They're vilified by our current administration. But this is a very strong part of our history that we all need to know. Our Constitution stood for these things, to help move Black people forward, or on the other hand, not necessarily if you're 3/5 of a human being.
And even within that time frame, the 1865 to 1954, if we look at 1954, we think of Board of Education, Board versus Roe. So it is the desegregation of schools, right? And what that looked like. But Vanessa Cedar Walker, in her book, Their Highest Potential, she retraces before the 1954 desegregation case, where we were actually doing our own education in ways that it elevated our Black folks, in ways that made sure that they had everything that they needed. And so even in light of all of the judicial things that were happening, there was a Black community that was already educating their children, right? They were already in ways that go beyond what many people know, right? Where they became, they reached their highest potential. And so within those timelines, all of the communities that are at work underneath those timelines and making sure that the Black community, the African American community, had the things that they needed, right? And so there's some people, there's some scholars that say actually desegregation was one of the worst things that happened to Black people in America, right? Because we had so many things that we had to do underground in a lot of ways, but we were doing it, right? And so I think it's important to also know that even today, and we'll contextualize that inside of today's space, where there's oppression, there has to be resistance. And that's Paulo Freire, oftentimes talk about where there is oppression, there is resistance. And that is not the well-known history. The well-known history does not put us at our highest space and tell the story of our highest space. They always take the stories of our lowest space, and they want that to be us. They want that to define us. And so it's important that we push back against those narratives as well, and make sure that people look at us in a way that really shows who we are in our fullest.
Exactly. So that's and a point where very well made, Dr. Aisha, and that kind of loops back again into the Reconstruction period that I'll go over a little bit with you guys. So okay, we've already gone over slavery. We've gone over the amendments of the Constitution. The Reconstruction period Dr. Aisha is talking about is 1863 to 1877. So now you've got freed slaves. Some were born free, some were freed, okay? And during that period, this was an attempt to redress racial inequities of slavery. It involved politics, social well-being, economic, education, just as Dr. Aisha said. And this is something when I really look at this and I really thought about it, this was just after the American Civil War. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers don't really understand a whole lot about the Civil War and what it stood for in America, and why there's this big thing with all these statues coming down and monuments and the Confederate flag and things like that. The Civil War is one of the things that actually divided the North from the South. The South was in strong support. They kind of wanted to be a separate country, really, and they wanted to carry on with slavery. They pretty much wanted to keep blacks enslaved, and it became a big deal. And President Lincoln, who from Illinois, was very, very much against it. So that's exactly why the Confederate flag is so wretched, horrid, and offensive, because it is in strong support of the Great South, as they call it, which is in strong support of slavery. And that's why you see it a lot with these Aryan groups. You see it a lot with these white supremacist groups. They consistently hold that as their banner for the strength in the South. But in any case, as Dr. Aisha said, this is something very interesting to know. Over 2,000 blacks held public office up to the Senate. They made it all the way to the Senate, even though they did not have proper representation in government in a proportional way with the numbers of blacks. So think about that, guys. In the 1800s, the late 1800s, we had blacks that were in government. We had professionals, we had bankers. Out of those 2,000, they guesstimate 1,000 of them were former slaves. Okay, there were towns. There were thriving towns and businesses and all of those things. Just as Dr. Aisha said, it was a strong sense of separation, but we had our own. And again, what she's saying is true. There have been several books saying that actually desegregation really did not help Black people as a whole. It was supposed to be a clause in there, separate but equal, that never really came into being. But these towns, it's very significant. These towns that were all in Florida, all over the South. Most recently, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I'm trying to figure out what to call him. Trump just held his rally not too long ago. Tulsa, Oklahoma is the site. You guys can Google this. It's so easy now. You have Google. It's the site of what was known as the Black Wall Street. Was a town there in Tulsa, was actually there in Tulsa, and they burned it to the ground. killed over 300 people, all the businesses, everything got burned down. It was just horrific. And that was in Tulsa. And it's very interesting that the rally was held in Tulsa, and the rally was supposed to be held on Juneteenth, which is June 19th, a very significant day in our history as Blacks in this country. In any case, these towns were called sundown towns, even though they were separate towns, all Black. People were not allowed to be out after sundown. So there was still a lot of heavy policing and all the bad stuff that goes along with that. If I jump forward, because I want to make sure I give Dr. Aisha enough time so we can deal with our educational systems and our communities significantly. I fast forward, we're going to talk about something called Jim Crow laws. Those were from the 1870s until 1965. Now I want you to keep in mind with the Emancipation Proclamation, which actually abolished slavery in the 1860s, it was a backlash that came into play. These Jim Crow laws, and these were up until 1965. I want you guys, you really got to focus on these dates here. 1965. Okay, I was 6 years old, at that time. Okay, Jim Crow laws, which we still see somehow remnants of today, state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the South. And some of them did come north, by the way. The intent was to deconstruct political, economic, and economic gains made by the Reconstruction period that I just spoke of, okay, from 1863 to 1877. They lasted until 1965. We're talking about things like separate hospitals, no riding on the bus, on the front of the bus. You had to sit in the back of the bus. Like you've seen Rosa Parks talk about these things. You know the story with Rosa Parks. All of these things, militaries, buses, cemeteries, housing, a lot of this stuff came north, right here in Chicago. We've suffered.
With the story of Rosa Parks, I just want to share this because I didn't learn this until I was getting a master's degree at DePaul.
I'm so glad you're adding it.
And I'm a product of Chicago Public Schools. And I even did plays when I was a little person, right? About I was just so tired and I had to get my seat up and I just wasn't taking it anymore. When the reality is, this was organized for months beforehand. This was one act that was a rippling effect and a domino effect that was already set in course. This was not a woman that got off work and was actually just tired and refused to give up her seat. Right. This was a concerted effort. This was planning. This was collaboration. This was brothers and sisters looking out for each other, making sure that everybody had a ride to work. So this was not just this haphazard thing that happened. And unfortunately, our history books do not tell us the true history. And we have to question that. We have to ask, why is it that you wouldn't tell us the full story? So I want the audience to begin to question the histories that we learn and how we understand Black folks and how we what we have been told, what we haven't been told, and who benefits from telling the story that way.
Miseducation. It's been an incredible miseducation, and your point is well taken. This is really an unbroken chain for the struggle of freedom in this country. So again, we urge everybody, you need to understand the history of this country. Otherwise, history will repeat itself within our Muslim community with our boys and daughters. Our boys and sons and daughters here. So what's interesting about this, to the Jim Crow, it lasted until 1965, but in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, in that case, the Supreme Court laid out again the separate but equal doctrine for public facilities. So again, separate drinking fountains up until 1865, housing, all of these things, which I'm gonna have to go into a little more detail, but I'm gonna move ahead because again, I wanna leave enough time, surely for the education component. Jim Crow, 1870s to 1965. Now, what did Jim Crow affect? Listen to this, guys. Military, segregation, okay? Blacks could enlist into the military, could enlist in the military, but it was separate, totally separate. My father was one of the first Black Marines, you know, when he was able to enlist, but it was segregated. Look at the hypocrisy of that. You get to fight for a country, but you don't get to be equal to someone else. You don't get to be equal to the whites. But to my father's generation, it was an honor to be able to fight for a country, but not just that. You have to understand the psychology of the time. To be looked at as a man, grown men were consistently called boy, and grown women were consistently called girl. Whether we were your housekeepers, we did your laundry, we cut your grass, whatever we did, we were boys and girls. So to a lot of men of my father's generation, to be able to be in the military and to be a Marine at that was still quite an honor. The Rosa Parks story, which everybody knows, and Dr. Aisha just brought up, that's 1955. Something you need to look up a little bit yourself, the story of a young boy named Emmett Till, young teenager, I think he was 14 years old, from Chicago, went down south, I don't remember which state right now, it might've been Alabama or Mississippi, to visit family. He was accused of whistling at a white woman, and you can't even say he was brutalized and murdered. Body was brought back here to Chicago. Actually, he's buried in Alsip, and his grave is still desecrated to this day. There's a monument of him in Tennessee, and they've had to enclose that because people consistently just desecrate it. Absolutely horrible. The story behind that is the woman who made the claim admitted, what was that, Dr. Aisha? Maybe like 5 years ago, she admitted that she lied. Yeah. Long article written up in Esquire about it, and et cetera, that it really didn't happen that way. And she was so afraid, and she felt so bad that this child had gotten murdered. His body was brought back here to Chicago. His mother insisted on an open casket funeral so people could see how badly they beat him. They mutilated his body and they hung him, and I think they hung him as well.
I think
after he was dead.
I'm sorry. I think this also speaks to, yeah, she felt bad, but she did not have the courage to do what was right at the time, right? Uh-huh. And so her feeling bad, I could care less about her feeling bad, right? Because, and I think we can all take a lesson from this, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but there takes courage to do this work, right? And just feeling bad for people or sad for people, that's just not enough. That's just not acceptable.
No, I mean, it really isn't. So, you know, so if you guys want to look that up, Emmett Till, there's clips on YouTube. There's been a movie made about it. This was 1955. Then you have the Little Rock 9, Arkansas, 9 students, 1957, who went to high school with the National Guard present. The Civil Rights Act, 1957. The Woolworth Lunch Counter sit-ins, 1960 in Greensboro, North Carolina. And if I remember correctly, John Lewis was part of that. The great civil rights leader, senator, who just passed away last week. The Freedom Riders, he was involved in that. You guys probably saw Oprah did a special on that, where they rode all over the South in protest. That was, I actually got some dates on that. May 4th, 1961 to December 10th, 1961. The bus was set on fire because they were on the bus. I think it's really hard for people today to understand what kind of hatred we're talking about and what kind of hatred we have to deal with as Black people every single day. Every single day. You know, I've had to think about this every single day. I'm 61. Since I was 14, I have to think about it every single day. Wherever I go, wherever I walk into a room, I look instinctively to see if I'm the only one. Either am I the only Black one, or am I the only Muslim one, which is another story. In any case, Freedom Riders, 1961. 3 of our great civil rights leaders, you guys are familiar with Malcolm X, Dr. King, and then there's Medgar Evers. He was murdered in 1963. The March on Washington, the very famous one where Dr. King gives his I Have a Dream speech and you see the Muslim brothers standing behind him, that was 1963 again. 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed by President Johnson. Then we have Bloody Sunday from 1965, where Dr. King did the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, which I always keep my poster behind me from that movie. Very good movie. 1965, the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. Let me go back when I told you earlier in the late 1800s, when the right to vote was already passed for Blacks, was already passed. So look, we're talking 100 years later, and we're going through the exact same thing now, by the way, with voter suppression and this 13th Amendment. If you have a prison record, you lose your right to vote, and et cetera, et cetera. We're going through this same thing right now. And anybody who thinks, if you think it's not affecting you, you're wrong. It's just not true. Okay, this is in our DNA. It is in our DNA. Then we have Malcolm X murdered in 1965. We have the formulation of the Black Panther Party in 1966, also an extremely false narrative. Most people don't know anything about the Black Panther Party. Spike Lee did a movie to try to rectify it, okay? But the Black Panther Party actually started as a defense party, okay? To try to defend Blacks against over-policing, police brutality, the harassment of women and children. They were really a group who were there to protect the people. Okay, not a terrorist organization, not all of this stuff that you're seeing. You know, you always hear about, oh, the spooky Black Panther Party. You guys probably don't know. They actually started the breakfast program. The breakfast program where kids get food every morning, poor kids, so that they can learn and not be hungry. Okay, they started that. That came from them. And Dr. Aisha has a couple of books that she's recommending. That I hope you guys, will consider. And I have a list of things that I've had them compile for you too. 1967, there was a movie about this, Loving versus Virginia. I don't know if any of you caught that. Remember, in 1965, it was still illegal for interracial couples to marry. The Loving family, that's their name. The husband was white. The wife was Black, and their marriage was considered illegal, and they would have been imprisoned. They hid out married, and I forgot that in the movie, but I don't know who married them. It was a miracle they found someone to marry them. 1967, okay. 1968, Dr. King was murdered, okay. Our modern day civil rights movement had been full steam ahead at that point. So that's just a brief timeline. Like I already said, this is an unbroken chain for the struggle of freedom. That's kind of I don't know. I consider it kind of a quick synopsis. I'm going to go back and touch on a couple of points here. When I talked about the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they actually had in Tulsa. They had 2 airports. This Black community had 2 airports and 6 Black families owned planes. Okay, just think about that for a minute. 300 were murdered, 800 people were injured, 35 blocks were burned to the ground. That was a backlash of the Reconstruction period. So the narrative that everybody's getting is totally wrong, just absolutely totally wrong. Something in there too worth mentioning, from 1915 to 1970 is something's known as the Great Migration, when a lot of Blacks left the South and came north for work and for a better life. What's significant to us here is Chicago is one of those main points. It was one of those main stopping points, Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit. Why? Because the history of Chicago here, we used to have the stockyards, which were someplace down near, I think someplace over near Commercial, 70 something and Commercial, all the way, like that was US Steel, steel factory. People came for jobs there. My father was the first Black foreman there also, who still got called boy, by the way. and we had the stockyards where he had also worked. It was one of the largest, if not the largest, meat packing in the country. They did the slaughtering of all the animals and distributed meat all over. So you had 6 million people, Black people, come from the South for a better life. They came here to find work. Very significant in Chicago history, because most of those people lived where we call now Bronzeville, okay? And when that area became so overly crowded, they were put there purposely to stay segregated. When that area became so overly crowded, that's when they built the projects, AKA Caprini Greens and Robert Taylor homes, okay? And there is, they say if you look at a map, which I don't know if you know this, Dr. Aisha, but they say if you look at a map, which is over there down where UIC is, UIC used to be called Circle Campus years ago in the 70s. Reason it was called Circle Campus is because these projects and these homes where the overflow of Blacks had been sent created a circle, kind of an offshoot of the loop. It created a loop. That's why UIC was called Circle, and that area was called, Circle Campus, okay? So it was just another way to segregate and to keep us in our own communities out of the way. Prior to that, and I have a video that you guys can watch later, which talks about the formation of the suburbs. You guys gotta understand, Chicago is an incredibly, horribly segregated city. When Dr. King marched in Marquette Park, he got bricked. He said he had never felt such hatred in his life, and this was probably even more than he ever felt in the South, which is why Eman actually went ahead and did that monument to him in Marquette Park. He was bricked and walked away bloody. Where Marquette Park is now used to be an all-white, primarily Eastern European community, okay? So a lot of this stuff, I mean, it's very, very significant. So the birth of desegregation occurred in, let's say, 1964 for the most part, okay? Voters' rights, 1965, et cetera, et cetera. Between 1881 and 1968, the numbers, which we would even question, are about 5,000 Black people lynched. It just goes on and on and on. If I fast forward to some modern day statistics, we'll talk about only 40% of Blacks in this country own homes compared to 70% of whites. Incarceration rates are 6 times higher for Blacks than whites. 60% of the people in prison are Black, but Blacks only constitute 30% of the population. When we talk about, again, healthcare, the spread of COVID, you guys have already seen how high the numbers are in the Blacks and the Latino communities, even though we're only 30%, but we're the essential workers. This has a lot to do with poverty and living conditions, how this virus is so much more easily spread. And then when we talk about economically, okay, and this is a statistic from as recent as 2016. Hourly wage as of 2016 of Black workers is only 82.5 cents for every dollar that a white person makes. So when we talk about, all of this women's lib and all this and that, et cetera, I want you to think about these numbers in terms of race. I also want you to think about these numbers, even if you want to look at it in terms of gender. If you're a Black woman, how do you fall into that, okay? Household incomes for Black remains only 61.6% of that of a typical white person, okay? Blacks are still 2.5 times as likely to be in poverty as opposed to whites. And then let's talk about loans. Let's talk about businesses. The predatory loans. If a Black person can get a loan, it's going to be at an incredibly higher interest rate. All of this goes back to the definition of what is institutionalized racism, systemic racism. This kind of all goes hand in hand. Medical care. Medical care is not equitable here. Just up until maybe 2 months ago, there was a huge plan to destroy, and you guys might have heard of these hospitals. It was going, their southeast, it was going to be Mercy, St. Bernard, Provident, Lakeshore Hospital, and Trinity Hospital. These are all hospitals that are in the middle of the Black neighborhood. They were going to tear all of these hospitals down and they were going to build one hospital. Okay, that's a money-making venture. That is not something that's for the people. Okay, how you can tear down 5 hospitals and build one. You're talking about a population of people who don't have cars, health insurance. What's health insurance? Even if you have a job, you probably won't have health insurance. If you work at Walmart, you won't have health insurance if you can get a job at Walmart. So, you know, all of these things are so deeply, deeply steeped in our very being.
And I think what it also says, you know, when there's a disinvestment in communities, in Black communities, what does it say to the people that live there? When you don't fund their schools, and you don't fund their hospitals, and you don't fund their roads, and what is it saying about what is valuable? What is it saying about what is not valuable?
But you fund liquor stores. You fund liquor stores and churches. And we need to be honest about this, okay? We fund liquor stores and churches. Okay, liquor stores, churches, cell phone, beauty supply places where you can get your hair done, your nails. You know, it's something has happened where people actually believe that these people don't want anything else. They don't want anything else but fried chicken and to get their nails done and have a cell phone. You know, it's just not true. I mean, if you ever talk to some of these people, there are people who really, they don't want to sell drugs. They'd rather have an honest life. You know, you're always going to find that element somewhere, which reminds me of a book that you've heard me speak of before, Dr. Aisha, A Condemnation of Blackness. This book is written by Elijah Muhammad's Christian grandson, and he was a sociology professor at Northwestern University. He talks very seriously how every single ethnic group that came to this country was able to shake their stereotypes except for African Americans. You know, you're right, this really, really needs to be addressed. And as people of faith and as people of equity and honor and dignity, who knows better than us, honestly, as Muslims?
And part of the problem, and I'm going to be candid with folks on this in this space, and hope that this space is one of both being candid, but beginnings of healing and reconciliation. But as you say, we know better, but we're not doing better. So I grew up in Bronzeville. Well, it was a low end when I grew up in it. I grew up on 45th and King Drive. When I walk into neighborhood stores, the questions that other Muslims asked me when I was just like, Assalamu alaikum, oh, you're a Muslim, you know, excited to encounter another Muslim. Where are you from? Who's your parents? Right? So no, you can't be a second generation Black girl on the south side of Chicago that knows something, you know, about Islam. You can't be that person, right? And I'm going into a liquor store so that I could buy penny candy at that point, right? And those same liquor stores still exist. And so when we may know better, but I think the Muslim community has also been very explicit in putting themselves on the backs of Black folks and disenfranchising those communities, taking from them and not giving back to them. And so part of that history is what we have to reconcile in the current day contemporary context of what's going on in Black communities all across America.
Well, it's almost like, you know, and it's interesting that you should bring that up. It's almost like, to be honest with you guys, it's almost like you know, you're Muslim and you're Black. It's almost like that kind of thing, because I've gone into grocery stores in every full abaya. The only thing I didn't have on was a niqab and gloves, you know. And you're Muslim? Yes. You know, a lot of us are, you know, an awful lot of us are. We have that history. You guys might not know, but we have, like, I think I know some families that are like 4-generation Muslim that are Black in this country, maybe even more, which brings me to something really important. I did put this book on my reading list. And I think it's very significant. All of us, you know, those of us that know Islam, you know, we're trying to learn more about our deen. African-American Islam. This book is written by our very own Amna Beverly McLeod. She was the professor at DePaul University who probably taught a lot of your kids Islamic law for over 30 years. We have been graced and very blessed to have her right here in Chicago. She's the author of several books. I'm hoping she'll be speaking more and she'll be out there a little more. But this is a book that really, this book really needs to be read.
Mashallah, she's here with us today too.
Yes, yeah, I made sure that. So I said if anybody had any questions, you know, that they wanted to ask her as well in the chat box. This woman has an extensive history, mashallah, of Islam in America. I might be wrong. As far as I know, she's written 9 books, traveled extensively around the world. She is a scholar within her own right and a medical doctor and a PhD doctor. So, you know, she's an excellent person to refer to if you guys want to know anything about the history of Islam in America. And I just really want to recommend this book. I recommend just about anything that Dr. Amna writes. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna. I just want to mention to the audience also that Donna has compiled a reading list as well as a list of articles and movies that we can watch afterwards. And if you are registered for this program, you will be emailed that list that she's taken the time to compile for us so we can, inshallah, continue this work. So thank you very much for suggesting the books and everything. We really appreciate it. And I know this was a lot of history in a very short amount of time. And that's why that additional reading list is going to come in handy for all of us, inshallah. And
let me just say, please forgive me for any errors or anything that I might have thrown in there. I am not a historian. I'm a nurse, but I have a special interest in, you know, in my African-American history. I've been involved in an immigrant Muslim community for 30 years. I have raised my 4 daughters. When we talk about schools, and then I'm going to pass this mic off to Dr. Aisha. I've raised my 4 daughters in a community where they were the minority. You guys really need to know the racism is rampant in our communities. I begged a lot of Black families to stay. And we're all Muslim, and they wouldn't and they couldn't. And to be candid with you, it did not come to the front of my mind. I knew why I stayed. I stayed because I'm a Muslim. Alhamdulillah, I stayed because what do we read? You know, this mosque is my mosque. By Allah, I have a right to be wherever there a mosque is, I have a right to be there. You know, it's a house of worship. And I stayed because of what I read and because of what I know in Quran and Hadith is my right. I was not going to be ran out, but I'm resilient. I'm 61. Okay, I was one of the first Black bust-in kids to an all-white school in the early 70s. So I've dealt with a lot, just like in my bio. I've dealt with a lot, an awful lot. It's been part of my whole life, but what I did not recognize is that most people have not dealt with a lot, and that was a lot to ask. The bullying, the name calling, the kids being made fun of, people putting their hands in your daughter's hair to see what her hair feels like, you know, like you're some type of subhuman, you know, your girls being told that they're burnt, being told, oh honey, don't worry, not everybody's meant to be married, you probably won't get married. You know, me myself being told my face was as black as dirt. And these are Muslims saying these things. These are Muslims saying these things. You know, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but it came to the front of my mind that, you know, for goodness sakes, being a Black kid bust into an all-white school, I could probably handle just about anything because I had an extreme resilience to it. Most people don't. I can be the only one in the room. I can be the only Black one in the room. I can be the only Muslim one in the room. I can be the only Black Muslim nurse in an all-white hospital. You know, all my life I've been the only one in the room. And that makes it, that teaches you something very different. Either literally it makes you or it breaks you. And our children are suffering in these school systems, you guys. And Allah forbid how many children look at this and decide that they don't want to be Muslim.
Right, and that's a very scary thing.
It's a very scary thing. There's one story in particular where a friend's daughter told her mom, if I wasn't born Muslim and I had to choose between Black and being Muslim, I think I would have rather been Black. What does that say when you hear stories of children coming to school and they sit down and kids have taken the Quran and used the highlighter and they've highlighted all through Quran the word slave, and you put this in front of a Black kid's face? What do you guys think that does to a person's ruh? And this is a child who's growing and developing. You know, we really have to do better. We have to do better at this because there's a lot of suffering. It's just too much suffering. Why would someone want to stay in this environment? Why wouldn't they go out towards the other? Right. So I leave you with that to think about. Dr. Aisha?
Thank you so much, Donna. And we are going to pass over to Dr. Aisha. Thank you for sharing. I know it's emotional labor for you all to be sharing these traumatic experiences. We all appreciate so much that you are teaching us so much with your lived experience. Now, after all this history that Donna has taught us, we're going to move on to discussing some systemic racism, how racism is prevalent in American systems, and actually how that affects our Muslim communities and our Islamic schools. So Dr. Aisha, please go ahead.
Bismillah. Thank you so much. And thank you, Carriers of Light, for inviting me to share and to listen and to learn from the community. And also, thank you for having the courage to bring the topic to the forefront and have a discussion around it. So Bismillah, I'm going to cover two quick things in this time, and I'm going to start this the power of our language and our words, right? And then I really want to dive into one system in particular, a system of the school to prison pipeline, right? We see a lot that's going on around the justice system right now, and as educators, there is this school to prison pipeline. I want to make sure that we understand it. And then I want to make sure, kind of round it off to talk in particular about Islamic schools. In the chat, all participants, if you could write down any word that you think is a coded word for Black people, not African-American, not Black, but another word that people may use instead, if you can write it in the chat. Got it. Thank you, Muhammad. Thug, that's one, absolutely. Kid in the hoodie, like it. Welfare queens, thank you. Urban or inner city, absolutely. Give me two more and keep on writing them. Ghetto, absolutely. Minority, yes. So continue to write those words, but also look at what other people are writing and also think about those words. I want to talk a little bit about the power those words have and how they play into this institutional racism. Because when we talk about institutions, the words that we use for people to describe them or not describe them, they have an impact on how we think about them, right? Our thoughts become words and our words become actions, right? And so if we can begin to break down the words that we use, and then work on our internal thoughts and what the media has shown us about people. Just like if I said that same word for Muslims, you know, people, give me another word for Muslims, people will put up other things, right? And we can all think of terrorists, this, we can think of those words, right? And we know how we feel about those words. So let me take thug. So Derek Clifton, and I'll send you the link to this. It did an article about the 7 coded words most used for Black folks, right? Thug is number 1. Right? So many whites and others dismissively use the word to describe young Black people, especially Black men, to imply that they're being violent or irrational and shouldn't be taken seriously. And this is because of the way they look and they dress. In other words, their skin color and how they dress. So if we think of that as Muslims, right? If somebody looks at us and looks at how we dress and then has a word for that, like terrorists, for example, how do we feel? I want to bring this to my non-Black brothers and sisters in a way that you can really understand it, right? Because I know that sometimes with all of us, if we are in the position where it is not on us, that oppression is not on us, we don't really understand it. Inner city, this term reinforces the concept of white flight, right? I know Sister Donna talked about the redlining and all those things. So inner city is like, oh, those people, right? It others a group depending on geographical location, right? So again, why not say Black or African American, or like, why are you saying these other words? Ghetto, welfare queen, terms largely that become synonymous with being cheap or substandard or undesirable, or yes, Black. Those should not be synonyms for Blackness, but as we all know and recognize that they very well are. Here's a few other ones, and I didn't see these in the chat, but Oreo, right? So Oreo is another word, and that's much more of a negative connotation, but it reinforces the assumption that there's an absolute quality for being Black and being white, regardless of a person's lived experience. If you talk the King's English, you're an Oreo, right? If you liken it to mainstream pop, or if you're dressing preppy, you could be considered an Oreo. So it puts in our heads that there is something that's very distinguishable about being a Black person and being a white person. And if you have any of those qualities that are white, then you are not quite Black enough, right? Uppity is another one, right? Uppity is often given to Black people with relatively seen as positions of power or prestige, and compared to their white peers. Yet when Black people present themselves as poised and composed, they're seen as uppity. Why is that? Black people can't just be Black people that are composed. That goes to, oh, you're very articulate. Why does that have to be a descriptor, right? So again, I want you to question these things. And one that we all know too, Sadidi is one, yes, Donna, that is parallel to that. How about shady or sketchy? Have you ever heard of someone describe a community? Yeah, it's kind of sketchy. What comes to your mind? Do you see white people walking their dogs when someone says sketchy community, right? And so what are these words doing, right? What are these putting in our heads about who Black people are and who Black people are not? And then of course the old you people, as if Black people needed any more reminders that the white privilege that rules American society is not, they don't have, right? So you people clearly distinguishes those things. So these are a few of the words, and I love all of your input on this, because what's important and what I know is that, so I've had the privilege to go to various Islamic weekend schools and do trainings with Sound Vision for the last 3 to 5 years. And what I hear over and over again is there may be one African-American school teacher, and it's very, they always bring up, well, there's people say things about the Black students that I don't agree with, and I don't know how to talk to them. So there are words that the larger society says in lieu of Blackness, right, that are anti-Black. But what are those words in Islamic spaces? We have a very different language, and we have to recognize that language in our community is just as disenfranchising, just as oppressive as these larger things that we can readily see, right? That we can readily see and say, man, you say that's not, if you call someone an Oreo, you might get smacked in certain spaces, right? Why don't we see that in our own? And two, why don't we have the courage to say, yo, that's not cool. Like, that's not it. If we are in positions of power as educators, and if we don't use our power to assist our students, or how many folks will consider themselves, if you're an educator on the call, how many of you would consider yourself educator that has a colorblind ideology. And when I say colorblind, is that you see all of your students as the same. You don't distinguish any difference from, you don't see their color. You see them all as the same. So you don't have to answer this yet, but I want you to think about it. If that is your position, I would challenge you to reevaluate that position. I would challenge you and ask you, why wouldn't you see something that is valuable? If you believe that who we are and all of our identities that Allah has blessed us with is valuable, why wouldn't you see that that is a girl as opposed to a boy? Why wouldn't you see that that is a African American as opposed to a Pakistani? Why wouldn't you see that? When you say that you're colorblind, why are you blind to things that have value? Why are you blind to things that you see as good? Oftentimes, we use that ideology because we don't want to have hard conversations. We don't want to be seen as racist. We don't want that to be us. And so I challenge you to really think through that and try to reconcile what that means in your life as an educator.
Dr. Aisha?
Yes, please.
I just want to throw this in real quick, and I'm sure you're going to touch upon that, but I want to appeal to all the educators. I want to make a sincere, heartfelt appeal that the principals, the teachers, the parents, please put an inexhaustible amount of effort in learning what to say to these Black kids that are being verbally abused in the Muslim schools, and what to say to your kids when they come home with these things, because it's just too much damage too soon. You know, college level is one thing, high school can be rough, but these little kids, you know, who get told their hair looks like worms, and you know, again, all those other things, I just want to bring that up straight front forward and home. There has to be a better way. You got to learn. When you're saying that people are uncomfortable discussing it, you have to discuss ripping these kids' hearts out of their chest. It is stomping on their iman and their self-esteem. We have to figure out how to address this issue when the kid comes to the principal and the kid's been called the N-word. And someone says, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's in music. I didn't think it was such a problem. When from the top down, that's all I got to say.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's a really great point. And again, I want to bring it home. There's a lot of action that's being taken around bullying in schools and bullying of Muslim children in schools. If you don't see one child calling another out of their name or talking about their features based on their Blackness, then you may have some anti-Blackness sentiments of your own that you need to question, and you need to interrogate, and you need to pray on, and you need to check, because that is bullying, right? And when we don't see, go ahead.
But sometimes it manifests itself exactly as you said, in the opposite fashion. And I'm sure you've heard this before. Oh, you're not like the rest of them. You don't look like the rest of them. I'm sure we get that a lot, especially based on how light you are or how much you dress in a certain way.
Yes.
You've passed the test. All of a sudden now you're not you people, you're one of us. Yes. So you're okay. So that is an opposite way of exactly what you're saying.
Absolutely.
You do have a typus.
And I'll tell you, it's the amount of ignorance, and some of this is ignorance. So part of what we'll kind of close with in a little bit later in the program is, what can we do, right? Educate yourselves. In life, I'm a continuous learner. I ask that we all become continuous learners of the history of what we're doing and what we shouldn't be doing. My daughter, when she was in second grade, I would go to the school. They went to public schools. I would, make sure that there were snacks that they could, when they passed out treats, that there weren't gummies that my children couldn't eat so they wouldn't feel separate. So I would buy treats for all the teachers. You can pass these out, right? I would do those things. And so they knew who I was. But my daughter came home one day and she had wrote, a long letter to her uncle. And I said, wow, you had time to write a 3-page letter? And say, what were you doing at school? She said her teacher asked her to go to the back of the room and go by the computers because she had raised her hand. They were talking about Christopher Columbus, and she said, "Wasn't he a thief?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, that must be against your religion. Please go to the back of the room and you can do whatever you want while we talk about how great Columbus was," right? And so, of course, then I had to give her a book, The Lies That My Teacher Told Me by Lois, right? So, but sometimes it's really just ignorance. And after she read it, she thanked me profusely. She just didn't know, right? And so part of what we have to do is also, as we have our students do your homework, right? Try to figure out, because we don't want to come from a place of ignorance and damage the folks that are in our space that Allah has entrusted us with, right? To be an educator is a large trust. And it's also a political act, right? I absolutely believe it. And again, Paulo Freire talks about what you say and what you choose not to say, they're both political acts. So if you see that something's happening in the classroom with one of your Black students and you choose to say nothing, then you have taken a stance. And so you have to identify with yourself what stance you want to take. The silence is an action, okay? So the power of words, I think, is really important. And when we talk about systems and systems of oppression, and really in a lot of ways, the education system is the epicenter of all these intersections of systems that merge into one space. And so we see that. We see the disparities in how schools are funded. If you're in a community that's more affluent, your school, because of the taxes that comes in, is better resourced. We see that in those same communities, you don't have students that need lunches, that don't have enough food at home, that have not had dental appointments, so they have aching teeth. They have, issues that you don't see in some communities, you will see in others because of their fluency. And oftentimes poverty and Blackness and brown, it goes hand in hand when we talk about poverty in America. So one particular system, and especially in the light of George Floyd and all of those before him, too many to name, and I don't want to name anymore. We have to think about the school to prison pipeline, right? And we have to think of, what is a place for police and policing in our school system? Tell me, give me a 1 in the chat or a 2. Give me a 1 if you think that it is normal to have police in schools. We can even say high schools, right? Or 2 if you think it's not normal. Again, when we go back to institutional racism and Donna's definition of embedded as normal, do you think that is normal? And so I'm getting both 1s and 2s. So this is what I want to talk about. And thank you all for being candid and being vulnerable in this space. And that's what it's for. That's what this space is for. So
I also enclosed an article about the history of policing in the city of Chicago.
Okay, I appreciate it. So I want to show a little video, just a quick explanation of what the school to prison pipeline is. This is about a 2-minute video. So let me share my screen. 1 second here. Look, I'm a person of many windows, so I need to close a few windows here because I'm gonna go to this one, and then I'm gonna go to a screen share. It makes it funky when I hold on. Let me unshare really quick, and then put it right on my computer because it gets a little wiggly if I don't do this first. I have to scroll down first and make it big. All right, now I'm going to exit the full screen here. When you really want things to work, that's when they don't work, just so you know.
Let me just say too, while you're doing that, Dr. Aisha, I think, your points are very well taken. There are a lot of excellent things out there now to understand our own implicit biases that we might have, because a lot of times people aren't actually aware, especially when you talk about a systemic racism issue, institutionalized racism. lot of good things out there. Harriet Lewis is doing some very, very good things on Eventbrite free for you to help identify your implicit biases.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you bought them here from another country or whether you're from here and you already have them, we all have them. So your point's well taken. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Here in the news sometimes, the school to prison pipeline. It's shorthand for how schools are funneling students, especially Black students, into the criminal justice system. It started in the 90s when schools responded to fears about crime with zero tolerance policies, which mandated suspensions and expulsions for certain violations. They also cracked down on little things like talking back or uniform violations. The hope was that it would keep bigger problems from bubbling up. But as a result, out-of-school suspensions have doubled since the 1970s, and they keep increasing even though juvenile crime rates have now been dropping for years. Around the same time, the number of police officers stationed full-time inside schools has increased by a third between 1997 and 2007. Ostensibly, they were there to prevent mass school shootings like the one at Columbine, but they end up being a way for schools to basically outsource discipline to the police. Schools with officers have 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without them. Sometimes the results are shocking. But the less visible effect is that schools are feeding the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Consider the fact that schools are more likely to have an officer on their campus if the student population is more than 50% Black. You might assume that that's because there's more crime at these schools, but although students at police schools are more likely to be arrested, they're not actually more likely to be charged in court for weapons, drugs, alcohol, or assault, at least according to one study. During the 2010-2011 school year, 1 in 6 public school students in the US were Black, but they accounted for 1 in 3 arrests at school. Same goes for other forms of school discipline. Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. It actually begins in preschool. 18% of preschoolers are Black. But if all preschoolers suspended more than once, 48% are Black. Studies show that differences in behavior can't fully account for these disparities. Black students and white students are sent to the principal's office at similar rates, but Black students are more likely to end up with a serious punishment. One study found that white students are more likely to be suspended for provable offenses like smoking or vandalism. Black students are more likely to be suspended for subjective offenses like talking back or insubordination. Students who are suspended in school are more likely to later drop out or get arrested. So the federal government is asking schools to make suspension and expulsion the absolute last resort. In Oakland, California, public schools are trying something called restorative justice, where both parties in a conflict talk it out with a counselor instead of relying on punishment. The results are pretty encouraging. In the last 10 years, chronic absenteeism is down and graduation rates are up in the schools that have tried it. Other cities and districts are also trying new policies. They're hoping that if their students end up in the criminal justice system, at least it won't be because the schools push them there.
So I wanted to give you just a brief, what is the school to prison pipeline and where that initiated. What's important to note is that many policies start with one layer of intentions, but the impact that those policies have, especially on Black communities, we begin to see, right? When you have subjective offenses like talking back, what does that actually mean? Talking back, you end up expelled talking back. There's zero tolerance policies. And again, zero tolerance policies we often don't see in Naperville, right? In the same ways that we see in the city of Chicago. Those play out very, very differently. And so we have to begin to ask, who are these policies impacting? And why are they impacting a certain portion of the population disproportionately? And again, the school system is a small portion of our larger society. It's a window into what the large society happenings are. If we think about a good book to read is Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, right? when we talk about how children are disproportionately, Black children are disproportionately affected in schools. And when we have police officers that are in schools and they, students have to go through metal detectors, and police officers are the ones that are actually dispensing discipline, it looks very different than when a teacher is dispensing discipline. And so when we talk about anti-Blackness and when we talk about a pipeline, there is something wrong when there's actually a term for having students in school and getting them from school to the judicial system, the school to prison pipeline. That we even have a term for that, that tells you that we have a system that is flawed. There should not be a pipeline, right? And so it behooves us to then begin to reimagine. What does it look like? What does it look like if we're having some discipline problems in the school? How do we begin to address those? Go ahead, sis.
And if I just want to say quickly, and this is an honest, safe space, alhamdulillah. If anyone here is having even a remote thought, is perfectly fine, okay? It's perfectly fine. If you're having a remote thought that, you know, well, what did the kids do? You know, or you know, they must have done something, that just doesn't happen. If you're having any of those thoughts, I want to suggest strongly, inshallah, bismillah, that you are exactly the person that needs to just read just a little bit more, do a little bit more homework, because you have been affected by this systemic, institutionalized, racist ideology. Just do a little bit of homework and you'll see, because this is the same thing that led us right up into today, right now with George Floyd. Same thought process.
Absolutely. And so I have a few statistics that I want to spotlight for Chicago Public Schools. And so it spotlights, first of all, that this is not a problem that's happened in the last year, right, or 2 years. This is and part of having systemic injustice that you see it over time, and you see it is embedded over time. So in 2008, Black students in Chicago were more than 3.5 times as likely to be suspended as white students. Do we believe that inherently Black students are just worse, right? I mean, these are the questions that we have to ask us, or is there something that's not right with the system? Under the direction of then Chief Executive Officer Arne Duncan, who was then the Secretary of Education after he was the Chief Executive Officer of Chicago Public Schools, the number of out-of-school suspensions in CPS district nearly quadrupled, from 23,942 to 93,212 in his 6 years, between 2002 and 2008. Even more dramatic was the increase in longer suspensions, from 4 days to 10 days. From 5,468 to 25,140, right? So this is what zero tolerance policies do to you. So what do you think that those students that now are suspended, they can't come to school, right? And not only they can't come to school, but they can't come to school for longer periods of times. And when those suspensions are looked at, going back to what Sister Donna said, it is not for shooting someone, right? Like that's not what's happening. They did not do what their teacher said do. They did not have their school supplies, and they did not walk. So what is her name? I can't think of her name, but one scholar, Jean something. I'll get it to you. But she does a study where it is she looks at 3 different types of schools as she characterized them. And one of them is the school where it's all about following directions, specific directions and order. You cannot deviate from that order. So if your teacher tells you to say to 1 + 1, this is how you add it, and you decide, oh, I want to add it this way, then you deviated from the order. These are the schools when you walk in, all of the desks are sitting straight forward. There's space between them. Everybody's directed towards the teacher. Nobody can talk. When they get in line, you all have a square and you have a space in between the square. And as she says, if these are the schools that are preparing people for jail, this is what they do in jail, right? They line people up. You have to follow that. If you deviate at all, you're in trouble. And for the bottom tier workers where you're not supposed to be a leader, you're supposed to follow exactly what I say because you have no brain and you're supposed to keep it moving. Then you have the more elite schools right? Where this would be in Chicago, this may be a lab school, right? Where people walk in the hallways to classes, they're talking to friends. There's no lining up and separation. You have desks that are in clusters and people are expected to engage. They're expected to come up with ideas and challenge each other, right? That's part of their learning process. And they're made to be the leaders of tomorrow, right? And so when she looked at these schools, who do you think were in those schools that only wanted you to do exactly what they said, do when they said do it, and if you stepped out of line, you were in trouble, right? These are the Black schools. And so when we talk about policing in the school to prison pipeline, we have to think of what are we saying and what are we doing and what is actually happening in those schools, and what do people see when they go in those spaces? And are our own institutions questionable in this, right? Are they? And as an educator, I've gone through all of the different spaces, so I understand you will have. So I worked in Glenview school districts, right? I was in the military for 5 years. I served active duty as a military police officer. When I got out, so I was, as a police officer in Europe, I would go to all the Department of Defense schools and I would teach the DARE program. And I'm certainly aging myself. If you all don't know, DARE is the drug abuse resistance education, right? And so I would go into those schools and I just loved it. I became the tutor, I became the cheer coach, I became all of these things. And so I got out and that's when I went to DePaul. But what happened is, so I was part of this program where they put you in a school while you took classes, but you had your own classroom and a mentor teacher. And what I found out is they gave me all the Black children. It was a military post that was there by Glenview School District then, and they gave me all the Black children. And every teacher came up to, I was also the only black teacher in the school. Everyone came up to me and they would, oh, I'm so sorry you have so-and-so. Oh, I had them that. Oh, so-and-so is so terrible. I was terrified. Like as a new teacher, I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, but when I got them in my classroom, the first day, the principal came to me and he said he had 4 parents that came to his office. And I said, why? What did I do wrong? He said, they just wanted their children to transfer into another classroom. And he made sure that I knew that was code for you are Black and you cannot teach our children anything. And so what he did is he told them, well, we don't just transfer students. So if you have a specific issue, then you need to let me know what the issue is. And so I had to do twice the work to get those parents to understand that I am not going to turn your child into a ghetto thug by being in my classroom, right? And so these are the things that we talk about in the systems, right? And so if we even look at today and we look at who we know as Muslims, I'm part of several organizations, CARE Chicago, I'm on the board, ISPU, I'm on the board. And what I do know, and I know that you know, that representation counts, right? We need to be represented in these spheres. And so part of the problem we're also having is that we're the Black educators. Why in my classroom in February, everybody else has a I love you on their bulletin boards outside, and I have to turn it around. I have to say, you know what, talk to the principal. Can we do a Black History Fair and invite the school to come in to our Black History Fair? Because it's not okay that although I have all the Black 4th graders, there's other Black students here too. And Black people are not the only one that need to know this history. And so we also need to question our systems, question our schools. Are we hiring Black folks, or are we looking at them as not able or not capable? And of course, when I talk about that, there's a whole pipeline that tells Black folks that there should not be Black educators. And so I want to show one other quick video around Black educators. And when we look at systems, again, we look at the school to prison pipeline, we look at our words, we look at who we hire, we look at what those folks do, right? It's important that when we examine our own systems in our own schools, that we look at all of these things and we interrogate them in a way that is not, that allows us to be vulnerable, that allows us to say, we are messed up in that. We got to get it together, right? Like, and there is no perfect. And so, but we don't want the perfect to be in the way of the good. We want to do good work, and we just continue to strive And I think that's the important part. So I want to show this other quick 2-minute video here around the shortage of Black teachers in the school system. All right, so so this is one of the activists that I've worked with for years in the community, in the African American community around education. And what he is doing is basically giving a summary of what's going on and what needs to happen.
Dr. Aisha, after this video, if you could give us some actionable items, and then we'll open it up for questions, inshallah, because I know some people have questions for you all.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem.
To bring light to a crisis in public education, the purge of Black teachers from American cities. We are calling on Chicago Public Schools. We're calling on people who aspire to be mayor of this city. And we're calling on the state of Illinois to work with communities to heal this problem. Long gone are the days when we had veteran African-American teachers who taught you, your little brother, your little sister, who had roots in your communities and knew your families. There was a time in Chicago when over 40% of the teachers were African-American, which was in line with the student population. Today, not even 18 years later, Black teachers in Chicago, only 20% of the population. We say that that is not a result of teacher quality. That is an intentional purge of a particular population from the system. When all the research says that children do better when they are taught by people that are from their own race. It says that children tend to go to the office less. Children take more honors in advanced placement classes. Children go to college more when they are taught by teachers who tend to look like them. But we are saying that these need to be attacked with urgency. That is full funding for the Grow Your Own Teachers initiative. Full support for Chicago State University to once again become that teacher college that produced a pipeline of African-American educators. We're calling on colleges of ed throughout the state of Illinois to fix their broken teacher preparation systems that don't even produce Black candidates. And we're also calling on an investment by Chicago Public Schools in future Teacher of America clubs in Chicago's high schools that focus on candidates of color. We have to inspire young people to understand the value of being a teacher in our classrooms.
So I wanted to show that because he really hits on all of those different systems. So if the layperson may think, oh, well, they just don't come. No. There's a defunding of systems that have perpetually produced them. There was the Renaissance 2011 was, it closed down many of the schools in African-American communities where all of the teachers were and gave them pink slips, right? And so we have to question these systems. We have to question what's happening, and we have to ask, what do we want to see? What do we think would be a benefit, right? Just imagine if our Islamic schools, there were no Muslims that were there teaching them. So we can move on to, inshallah, we can move on to a few action items. I think, so, and Donna, you certainly, you know, we can kind of go back and forth with this. I have a PowerPoint that I want to share with just a few action items to get us started on the conversation. And one thing that I would also like to do is to have our audience think through and try to commit to what you're going to take from today, or maybe something that you've been thinking about, or maybe someone else said, but a commitment to do something, right? I think that's important. So I'm going to share my screen with these action items. Let me put it up here. It's not coming up on my list. So I'm going to read them to you instead. So, man, I had a really cool pictures on here too. I hate when that happens. Oh no, okay, I'm going out of it and I'm gonna go back in to see. Okay, so no, it's not giving me that as an option. So one of the first things that I think that we have to do, and this is under undercurrent for all of the other things, is to dig down deep and have courage to do any action item, right? And that courage is going to come from some self-reflection and assessment. Where are you? Where are you in your understanding? Where are you in your actions? Where are you in your words? It is important that we don't only see ourselves as onlookers, but we see ourselves as active participants. And when we see ourselves as active participants, what's the action that you want to take? I would say our words, examination of our words and interrogation of those words. What words are you saying, and which ones do you allow to be heard by your ears, right? And not say anything. Again, silence is action as well, right? Then if you look at your school, do you look around and see students that have teachers that match the demographic of the student body? It's important that we have representation. And I think this is something that most institutions struggle with. I'll take UIC, for example. We have a very, very diverse student body, but we should have a much more diverse professorship, right? So we should have much more diverse and reflective of our student body. And so there's different colleges. We have 16 colleges that are doing different things because they know that this is important. One thing that we are doing in the provost office is we're offering a 2-for-1 special. And it sounds really bad, but that's what we're doing. If you find one underrepresented faculty member and you hire them, we will pay for the second one. Because one thing we also know is that, like me, as the only African-American in the building, as a teacher, it feels very isolating, right? It feels like I'm on an island and all of the Black fights I have to fight on my own. And hell, I'm tired. Like, I don't need to and want to fight every battle. And so our 2-for-1 special, it tries to deal with both of those things. We also have another, one of our colleges who's decided that they're going to invest money in, because they don't have any Black faculty members at all, that they're going to look for one, although that pipeline there's not many. They're going to have a Black professor speaker series. So they're going to pay Black professors to come in and speak to classes. So they see a representation and they know that this is achievable and attainable, and I can reach for this. When you don't see yourself in a space, how do you know that you're able to be there, right? It's important to have those things. I think those are my main things. Your words, and really looking at and interrogating those things, and looking at the systems that embed your school. And if you picked one for the school to prison pipeline, and you see the normalcy of police officers in our schools, I want you to interrogate that. I want you to ask yourselves, do we really have, and metal detectors, right? Do we really have a need for that? What can we do differently? And is that actually happening in most affluent schools, or most schools with white folk, or most schools with people with, or what are some other ways, right? Restorative justice, what does that look like? And what is the role that they have been in those spaces? So again, it's not an either or all and, it is begin to ask the critical questions. Begin to do the research to say, what has happened when this is in place? And as you saw, when there's more police officers, there's more students that go to jail. I mean, that's the reality of it. So if that's the way that you want your school to go, then those are decisions that you make with your eyes wide open. But these things have to be questioned. And I think that interrogation and that understanding that we are not from the same places, and there's some privilege that you bring to the space, right? And those words that you've heard year after year, that thug, that ghetto, welfare queen, those things begin to work on how you see things. And so how do you begin to rewind and unwind those things, to interrogate them and dispose of them as they need to be disposed of, so that you can then reimagine what your students are able and not able to do, and what you are putting into them and what you're not putting into them.
Does Dr. Aisha, I'm just curious, does anybody find this, it's no surprise to us as Black women, and Black men, I'm sure, but does anybody find this alarming that we're still talking about this same subject all these years? I mean, often when I think back, because of my age, and when you said about getting tired, I have to watch myself because I'm getting really tired, not tired, frustrated, just, I mean, literally just tired, tired. The things that you're saying are so true, and they've been so prevalent forever, you know, and that's making me think a lot. And then Dr. Amna just made a comment, you know, pertaining to what you said, that the powers that be that hire have made sure not to hire people of color, Blacks. But I have a question for you, and anybody else out there who can answer it. Would it be wrong, because you guys are the educators, would it be wrong until we get it right in our Muslim school system, when if something racial comes up, would it be wrong to have, like, I mean, like a go-to person if there is nobody on staff? Or, I mean, I'm thinking logically to have like some sensitivity training if you do have a Muslim school where you don't have a Black person, an African American on staff. But, you know, because people don't always know what to do. Some of them don't want to do anything, but some of them don't know what to do, you know. So like a consult, or, you know, somebody who they can consult with or something. What would you suggest as an educator for those people that don't have any Black person on staff to help these Black kids that are being bullied and teased because of their skin color or hair texture?
I would say absolutely. I think we need to lean in and learn, right? So leaning in into our lack of knowledge, and so our ignorance and understanding and getting an understanding is vital. But I will say that it's important to pay Black folks, right? That's another thing that's happening. And we see that again in higher ed, where our Black faculty members have a harder time making tenure because they're asked to do, you know, this service, and all the Black students are coming to them because there's not enough Black faculty. So they're mentoring, and they're doing all of these things, and doing so much of it that they don't have the time allocation that their white counterparts may have to get that tenure, right? And so we have to equip, adequately equip folks. When we ask them to be resources for us, we have to pay them for their time and their expertise. And I think that's something that's you show your value when you do that, and not just ask people to come in and volunteer.
I kind of addressed that a little bit about pay scale already, but you're talking about even a tenure on that level, not even on a level of a lower paying minimum wage job. Look at that. Again, the systemic institutionalized monster appears again.
Absolutely.
On a university level.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aisha. I would like to open it up for questions. If you are part of the audience, you may drop your questions into the chat box, and inshallah, Sister Donna and Dr. Aisha will be happy to answer for you.
And you know what? And while we're getting some questions in there, I do want to make one point too, because I want to kind of make this as real as I possibly can. For all of you guys, and a lot of you know me pretty well. My grandparents are buried in the segregated part of Glenwood Cemetery, right? 20 minutes from Bridgeview. And we grew up going there to visit them, and, you know, with my mom to take care of the grave, et cetera, et cetera. And it just never occurred to us that, I mean, that's just the way it was. And I can tell you, because I'm old enough, that's just the way it was. I never knew there was a Bridgeview. I never knew there was an Orland Park. I sure didn't know anything about Burridge and places like that, because you never went there because you weren't allowed to go and you could get hurt badly. Marquette Park was extremely dangerous. You did not, you know, we only hear things from the other side of, you know, South Side, Chirac, you don't go over there, you know, they live over there. I was even advised in a hospital setting by a white nurse not to buy a house west of Western because too many Black people lived over there. She was so sure I was an Arab immigrant or Indo-Pac. So we've got a lot to deal with, you guys, a whole lot. And we got to help our kids.
So we do have one question. Someone is asking, should we teach students to say Black people or African Americans?
So I think we have this conversation. I've had this conversation with several people, which I think is really interesting. And I don't know, it seems to be some generational spaces as well, that it depends. I think for me, either one is fine. For some people, the preference is African American. So I don't think one of them are pejorative terms though. Right, so
I got a really good definition actually, and I'm glad they did ask that question from one of the leaders of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which was founded, when was it, Aisha? 18 something, I don't know, long time ago. Anyway, in Springfield, she's the head in Springfield, and she told me that Black is preferable because it's more inclusive. African Americans is only those of us that are here in America and choose to associate with our African identity, but Black could be anyone somehow or another of African descent or non-Latino in sense heritage. So I'm trying to think, maybe Black is more inclusive.
Yeah,
but.
and I also think that sometimes you ask the person, right? I mean, that's when we talk about what matters to each person, and seeing people as valuable and in charge and have the autonomy themselves. All of us are not the same. We're not one, and just like, we could see someone, or others could see someone with a scarf and think everybody is from the Middle East, and that's just not the case. And so sometimes just asking, what's your preference? I think is okay.
Great. We have another question that says, as a layperson in the Muslim community, I love the Black community. What can we do to incorporate ourselves and be part of the Black community and work side by side with them? Where can we start?
Donna, you want to start that one?
No, you're the educator. I'm a hospital.
So I don't, where do you start? I think you start by educating yourself. I think you start by asking the question like you are, what can I do? And you listen. You don't go, instead of, as opposed to going into the space and, placing what you think should happen, and you taking the microphone and you leading. I think you make yourself available and you ask the question.
Thank you. We have another question here. Being in the field, do you know of organizations that I can contact so I can work towards getting property taxes distributed differently to addresses that institutionalized racism?
Yeah, that's a long running. This is this is very political. It's a long standing battle. So I think that's more along the political realm. I think rich folks don't want poor folks to have the same resources they do. Then it's like, why the hell am I paying all this taxes if they getting the same stuff I'm getting, right? And so that's really where that comes from. Is there's a disparity, and just like Sister Donna talked about, you can get a church and a liquor store in most Black impoverished communities, but they're not paying. Churches aren't paying any taxes, right? So you get a tax base. And so there has to be a total reconstruction of how we fund schools. And so that, but yeah, so it's a political force behind that.
So the same person asking, should I put my energy somewhere else? If I may add something, so I think we need to be researching who we vote for in every single state and local election. I think that would get us better insight as to who believes what and who supports what and who wants which money going to what places.
Absolutely.
100%. And no, I definitely don't think if God has put this on your heart to put your energies in that way, I think you should step forward and do it. You're not the only one. Maybe you're just the first one who has the passion to come forward and do it. There could be tons of other people just kind of waiting, just waiting in the wings. So no, I don't think you should maybe put it someplace else. That's a big concern. Do you guys know some of the highest property taxes in the state of Illinois are in Harvey? Anybody who knows where Harvey is? It's ridiculous. And I'll tell you, if you would go into some of these neighborhoods that everybody is so afraid to go into, and some of them, granted, you should be afraid, but that's not the case always, you know. If you saw how much people paid for a gallon of milk, Dr. Aisha can testify to that. Gallon of milk, price of gas goes up, you know. It's absolutely ridiculous, you know, how poor people are actually kept poor. The great James Baldwin had a very interesting quote that says something to the effect of, nobody has any, I'm paraphrasing here, you know, nobody has the idea of how expensive it really is to be poor. I mean, again, another disparity, guys, but taxes are just rampant, you know. How about some grocery stores? How about somebody would say, I don't want to do another liquor store. I don't want to create more alcoholics. I don't want to have my hands dirty and bloody with the haram that comes from drinking. Mm-hmm. And
I want to
how about a grocery store? How about that?
I want to add too that that's not the only way to do it. So if you look up Chicago Public Schools representative elected school board, I did some work on trying to make sure that the Chicago school board was elected and representative of the people. And so there's been a lot of work around that. It still has not. It's happened more, but yeah. But that the school boards can allocate money in different ways as well, right? So there's not just this larger thing of taxes and allocation, but there's this smaller things of how are school boards using the money, right? Are they spending you know, more money on the police officers and metal detectors than they are on the new books and curriculum, right? So how do you can run for school board, you can elect those school board members, you can fight for, so you for me it's starting off local, right, and then having that grow and mushroom.
Absolutely.
One question I have, and I think, mashallah, you've done a great job addressing the concept of systemic racism and how it holds communities down. But I still think there's a question out there that I often hear, and I want you to just directly tie this so nobody walks out if you're not having this direct tie. When immigrants say, I came to this country poor. I came here with no connections. I came here and built a life for myself. I was sending money back home. I was learning the language. I this and that. How come these Black people can't do the same thing?
We totally skipped over that because that's one of my favorite ones. Thank you so much, Dr. Rand. Again, and I'm going to be real quick, let Dr. Aisha touch on this a little bit. If you're asking that question here, you don't understand the effects of institutionalized and systemic racism. You don't understand what we don't call, as Black people or African American people, we don't, when we say PTSD, we're talking about what? Most people, post-traumatic stress disorder, huh? Post-traumatic slave disorder. There's been tons of books written on this. What happens to a people when they lose their language, they lose their culture, they consistently live in poverty. When you talk about how the banking system will not give you a loan, when you know, it's just, I mean, you can't even get a car. It's the only thing, you know what I learned recently with this COVID, you guys? And you educators already know this. Everybody being at home and they were trying to teach their kids, you know, on laptops that they don't have, right? I learned that a large percentage of Blacks in Chicago, everybody might have a phone, but you know what kind of phones they have? They have those throwaway phones. They have those throwaway phones. You know, it's a totally different world than the way we live over here in Bridgeview and Palos Heights and Burr Ridge and Naperville, and it's a totally different world out there. And when you have all those comfortable things, and yes, you did come from another country, but you know what? You had somebody who gave you something to help you start off. You had, I know families over here that have pulled all their money together to help the first person get a house so they don't have to pay the REBA. Okay, you know, everybody will pool. And then what do you guys call that? I forgot the term of it in Arabic, where you put all of your money in a pool and it rotates to each person. You know what I'm talking about? Somebody knows it. It's like it's 10 of us and we all give $100 for 10 months, and each person gets the whole lump sum of money at one time. You know, it's a term for it. You know, so So when you have that kind of collective thinking, unfortunately, we have not been able to get ourselves to the point to maintain that and bring it back, because it goes back to our history. It really does. We're practically, you know, in a barrel, just trying to survive for some of us. So no, we're not gonna do as good. We just won't, and we haven't. Some of us have, but that's my answer. Dr. Aisha.
So I would say, liken our time here and what we've been able to do. If we are all magnets, we have magnets that are pulling us, and we talk about these systems to the prison, that school to prison pipeline. We have magnets that are pulling us towards lack of education, lack of healthcare, like all of those are the magnets. And when you have different magnets when you come here. And so you have a different history when you come here. And quite candidly, I would say to those folks that you have the freedoms that you have because we have the lashes that have taken it. And so you have to, you can't say pull yourself up by the bootstraps to a bootless man. So first of all, thank Allah for what you have, but know that you have it because Black folks and Black Muslims have sacrificed so that you can come over here and that you can start the business in communities and take from communities of color and take and start your liquor. So there is a history, and there's a history that we've paid the cost for, but we have not benefited from. But you have been able to come over and benefit from the labors of that. This country was built on free labor, on our labor. So what if you were to come over here and they ask you everything you do for free, and we're gonna rape you, and we're gonna, once we do free you, we're gonna make sure that we put you in jail as soon as we can. Like, so remember what that history looks like, and remember and thank Allah that you don't have that history and that you've benefited from the works that we have put in. And now it's time that you know that to give back. Now it's time to redirect and say, I got mine, not I got mine, but alhamdulillah for all that you did so that I could come to a place called America, because there would not be a place called America if Black folks did not create what we are living on. So, I mean, there's a history that cannot be ignored. And if you ignore that history and you think that I am just better than you, then I'm gonna make du'as for you, because when that humility is gone, and then there is a problem. And we know who is the one that humbles all.
You know, and that's a really good, everything you said, mashallah. I've said this in a couple of other lectures too, and I think Dr. Aisha, you might have heard me say this. I would like everyone to consider two things. And that question also speaks of this, a reality check, okay? Your concept of the American dream. And I know this is heartbreaking for a lot of people who wouldn't even want to consider as an immigrant that they came to a country with such issues. You leave everything when you come here. May Allah bless you and reward you. You leave your family, you leave your language, you leave your culture. You might even have to leave some of your traditional dress. You leave your food. You can pick those things back up, okay? But it's never the same as being home, okay? I know that very well from the friends that I have that did immigrate here. But this facade of the American dream, it is an American dream for some, but for some but you know, your best dream is our nightmare. And it's not a nightmare that we bought on ourselves. So ditto to everything that Dr. Aisha said, you know, but somewhere if you want to play this game of dichotomy where you don't want to see this over there and I got here and I did this and you guys have been here all the time and you haven't done that, it's just not the same. We don't even have any psychologists or psychiatrists out there. We don't even have a healthy self-esteem at times. If you're going from a school to a prison pipeline, you know, if your dad's in prison, your uncle's in prison, everybody's in prison. If you believe everybody is in prison because they need to be in prison, then you believe George Floyd deserved and needed that knee on his neck because he needed to be controlled. I put some articles in. I do want you guys to read from a medical aspect. Recent survey, not that long ago, of medical residents, doctors in training, who actually believe that Black people don't feel pain to the same degree that whites do. See, this is all a common thread. It doesn't look like it, but it is. It's a thread. If you think you came here and you did so much better and we didn't do this and you've totally eliminated that. If you think that we don't, and I've seen it in the hospital, you think that we don't feel pain the same as, it is much harder for a Black woman in labor to get pain meds than it is if you're white. I'll give you another example, which infuriates me. You know, it's changed a little bit now where everyone has to have drug testing. You go into labor, especially if you're early labor, you have to get drug tested. Okay, I have seen time and time again, years ago, you get a Black woman who tests positive for cannabis, for marijuana, and you get a white woman who tests positive for cocaine. And guess what? The Black woman is gonna lose her kids. The white woman, oh, you know, poor thing, she didn't. And she comes in with a fingernail, baby fingernail this long, which is used to snort the cocaine. Everybody knows that if you know anything about working in a hospital setting or about drugs or even watching the series Breaking Bad. You know, this is the way it is. It's not the same. It just isn't the same. And our brothers and sisters who immigrate here, you need to understand, you might come here because of a war. You might come here as a refugee. You know, you might come here because you had family here. But you have a totally different mindset. You had a country. You still have a country. You know, you have a language, you have a culture, you have a food. All of our stuff is invented. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad one thing that he insistently said to those Blacks that did become Muslim through the Nation of Islam, he tried his best to stop them from eating what was termed as slave food. Slave food. What did we get? What did they gave us everything that they didn't want to eat. They gave us the pig intestines, the pig foot, the pig ear, the pig nose. You know, we ate weeds from the yard. That's our infamous dandelion greens. You know, we got slave food. This is the culture that we have evolved through. We don't need pity. We don't need anybody to feel sorry for us. We're strong. We've come through it, but we're still evolving. That's the only thing I think, at least from my perspective, I would want people to understand. You know,
and what we
but
need,
it's not the same.
Yeah. And while we don't need pity, and I definitely agree, what we do need is, as our Muslim brothers and sisters, for you to be those Muslim brothers and sisters. And we do need that, because I cannot, all of my identities as a woman, as a Muslim, as a veteran, as a Black person, these are all part of who I am, just like all of your identities are part of who you are. And so understand that and be our Muslim brothers and sisters at your highest space. That's what we need from you.
Thank you so much. We have one more question. It's a great question. Someone has asked, I work with organizations that serve Muslim high school and college students. Oftentimes these organizations become very South Asian and Arab centric. How can I make sure we're working to be more actively inclusive of the Black Muslim community?
That's a really good one. So I'm hoping that either you're in a leadership position, or if you're not, you get with someone that is of the same mindset. I think you have to have larger conversations. I saw someone earlier in the chat talked about a committee that kind of addresses these things for a school. I think that's a good idea. An ongoing committee and task force that investigates and interrogates all the things that your school may be doing or not doing, and anti-Blackness, that does this on a consistent basis. Because if we are the best of ourselves, we know that Shura will help us get there. And so I would say to start a collective conversation around it, and our collective thought about next steps, I think, are much more powerful than any individuals.
I see a question here. Well, actually a statement, and I so much appreciate this. I'm sorry, my screen is jumping around. Is it Atia? The truth then they got the Dod child and image of Black people. So I'm thinking it is coupled with teaching about the Black Sahaba and history, so many Black leaders. 100% true. The only thing that, and of course we should know about the Black Sahabas, we should know, okay? But what worries me is if we don't get right to the point and understand the systemic and institutionalized racism, for sure somebody is gonna say, well, that was the Sahaba. that has nothing to do with America and these Black people today. You know, we got to get the story right, you know, and then we can enhance it if we want to go through, you know, but first we have to, you guys have to understand, we need to be seen as human beings. I don't know any other way to tell it to you, okay? Those of you that know me personally, you see me as a human being. But if somebody doesn't know me, they don't necessarily see me as a human being. They don't. You know, I get mistaken for every single thing in the book because I'm not very dark. I get it. People always think I'm Arab. They think I don't speak English. If I wear shalwar kameez, people think I'm Indo-Pak. Okay, I could be Moroccan. It just depends. You know, I worked at one hospital 15 years and people didn't even have a clue I was Black. My name is Donna Neil Demir. I even had someone, the preceptor used to go behind me and try to correct my punctuation and my English and my charting. You know? So, and after September 11th, this is the honest to God's truth. Wallahi, when they found out I was Black American, I got treated worse. I got treated much better as an immigrant. Much, much, much better. It was patronizing. Oh, honey, you must have studied so hard to become an RN and your English is so good. I'm sure everyone's proud of you. Okay. But the minute they found out I was Black, it was a whole nother deal. They even asked each other they asked a Black girl, how long had she known I was Black? So, you know, we need to understand if we're going to move forward as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have us move forward in a proper way as Muslims, we need to really understand this, and we need to we need to be sure that people get the rights that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon those people. Okay, not all of this judgment, not this abid, not this kafir. I have heard just about every single thing that you can imagine. Me being part of a non-Black Muslim community, 97% of my Islamic life of 36 years. I have just about heard it all, you know, and some of this, it falls on us. We know better. We read every single day, don't we? We know, but we have this big romanticized version, which, you know, we call a thing, like Ayanna Van Zant says, call a thing. We have this beautiful image of who? Of Malcolm X. We have this beautiful image of Muhammad Ali. We have these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful images, but it does not filter down to every single day life. Okay? It really doesn't. People are only good enough if only. There's always a but added on there. You only get accepted into a circle if I'm exactly like you. And even then, I'm not going to be exactly like you, so I'm not going to be exactly accepted. So when do human beings get their rights to be human beings? By the way, which is one reason I think personally why so many Blacks converted to Islam in the first place, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also because they saw a light that it gave them a chance to be treated as a human being. I'd love to have a historian who had interviewed a bunch of Blacks that had become Muslim to see what was the thing that attracted them besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and grace. You know, that's one thing. It's over and over and over and over. We read in Islam. What do we read in Islam? You know, that one is no better than another, male, female, Black, white, except in terms of their deeds and by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, paraphrased. Okay. So we need to make sure that we're emulating that ourselves. And I feel so strongly about the way our kids are getting treated, because my kids, I have 4 of them, and my kids suffered for it. You know, I feel very strongly about that. You know, so everybody go home and consider that. Consider who you do you deem a human being and not a human being, or a half of a human being? And then ask yourself, if you had to deal with this 400 years, if your own constitution of your own country counted you 3/5 of a human being, how are you possibly going to do as well as someone who immigrates here with the husband and wife and the in-laws and the brothers and the uncles and the cousins, when you can't even buy property? You know, I just want you guys just to think of it. You've got to start thinking of things in a different way. We're Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask us, you know, and even if you're not Muslim, you're going to get asked anyway, you know. So think about that. Try to find your own biases, you know. Everybody that's running these liquor stores, Ask yourself, what do you think about these people? You know, what justifies your selling them pork and liquor? What justifies you having babies with those girls? I see them when they deliver those babies in my hospitals. And she's a well-kept secret. So if we're gonna do this right, we gotta do it real, you know. That's all I'm saying.
And then in closing, I'm gonna just add a little bit to that. While thanking the folks that are here. While I don't know you, I wanna make sure that you know that I know the fact that you decided to spend your Sunday listening and grappling with information around anti-racism and anti-Blackness says that you are an ally, and says that you are ready to do the work that it takes to get us to a place that is most pleasing to our Creator. Inshallah, we will all be blessed for the things that we're doing. We'll take this seriously. We will take it as if it is ourselves, because we know what we want for ourselves, we should want for our brothers and our sisters. And so inshallah, I am very grateful for the Carriers of Light for this venue to express myself. I will leave you with a few questions that I want you to just ask yourselves and grapple with in a few statements. One, I have been to most Muslim communities, either their masjids or a dinner that they have held in support of them. Have any of you been to any African-American community dinner or masjid? I know and have numbers on speed dial for members of the Muslim community that are not Black. Do you have that in your phone? Do you really believe that we are one ummah? Do you really believe that Black folks deserve to have the happiness, the liberties, the love of others in our lives? I mean, we're down to just let us live. Just don't kill us. Can we get beyond that as a Muslim community? Can we be at the forefront of showing the world what this thing should look like? Again, alhamdulillah, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you both so much for being with us. We've learned so much and you've given us so much to think about, and inshallah, a lot of action items that we can work on to address anti-Black racism in our communities, in our schools, in our masajids. Thank you again both so much. If you are an attendee here, please keep an eye on your email, because we will be sending you a list of resources, inshallah, that both of our speakers today have compiled. Thank you once more. This session has been recorded. It will be sent to everyone also who was registered.
And if anyone has any other questions for me or anything like that, anything, I'm always available for anybody in any community. And may Allah bless you, reward you, and keep you on me.
Jazakumullahu khairan to our speakers. Really a pleasure. Really such an honor to have you. I would really, I'd like to thank all of you, Sister Donna, Dr. Aisha, and Miss Saima, for all the behind the scenes work and all the efforts that you've put in today, and for bringing your life experience, your knowledge to this forum. It's been really helpful. I know this is just the beginning. It's just a start. There's so much more that we need to be doing individually, inshallah. And I'd just really like to close by highlighting that there have been a lot of really unfortunate experiences of the Black Muslim children in the Islamic schools here in the Chicago area. And I would really love to see us as Islamic schools work together to see how we can make a significant change for the future. So I hope that those who are here as educators and as principals and administrators and leaders of the Islamic schools can really start to connect with one another and work together. And you can seek out resources from the Black Muslim community, but please, when you're asking people to speak, when you're asking them to do work, please make sure that you are also valuing their time, financially, and not taking advantage of people's good intentions, inshallah. So we do need to make sure that we're being fair to one another as well. I look forward to future events. I look forward to committees. I look forward to task forces. I look forward to consultation organizations where we can get the help that we need to make sure that our spaces are not just inclusive, but they're welcoming, they're just, they're kind to all, and that we can really live in the model of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the way that his community was so welcoming. He himself from his heart was so anti-racism. Inshallah, we can try to live in that way. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward everyone for coming. You can reach out to me. I'm sending out emails to everybody who signed up, so you can reach out to me if there's something specific you need after this event, inshallah. And we will be compiling the list of resources that were shared here, as well as many others, and sending them. So look out for the emails from Carriers of Light if they're going to your spam, because I sent out a bunch of emails, at least 2 today. So if you're going to your spam, look out for that. Okay. Jazakumullahu khairan. Have a great evening, everyone. And inshallah, talk to you all soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.